But Couturier is actually a great place to kind of pivot us back to what I view as the biggest problem right now. And what I ultimately view as the biggest problem from last season when the wheels fell off of the Philadelphia Flyers, and the thing that I think still hinders them the most, and I still think is their number one issue right now, and it's the head coach. Now, I know that there's this belief out there that I became anti-John Tortorella because he was an absolute dick to Anthony Sanfilippo last year. Did I like that he was a dick to Ant? No. Do I think that the Philadelphia Flyers should have reminded their employee that being confrontational with the media isn't exactly a smart move here? I do. Do I think that because we are in a partnership with the Philadelphia Flyers, that they should have sat down their employee, John Tortorella, and said, no, you're going to answer his questions? I do. Did that meeting happen? I don't think so. And if it did and Torts still went off and every time said, I'm not answering your questions, then that's somebody being insubordinate. I think it was just kind of viewed as, you know what, Torts is getting the most out of these guys. His ultimate responsibility is, the play on the ice, and you just kind of live with it. But I thought that was kind of shitty. But no, if you go back and you listen to Snow the Goalie, and if you go and pick out any episode that you want from the time John Tortorella was hired up until last night, I've been very consistent. The only reason that I liked the hiring of John Tortorella at the time, there was one reason. I knew it was going to get Chuck Fletcher fired. That was it. I didn't believe in Chuck Fletcher's vision for the team. I didn't believe Chuck Fletcher was going to build a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And I knew that John Tortorella eats up and chews up and spits out GMs. That was it. And I said multiple times, I don't think the roster is good enough. I think he's going to put you in hockey purgatory because he's going to get you close enough to the playoffs, and you're not going to get a top 5 pick. And if you're trying to rebuild, it's a terrible hire. And then when they fired Chuck Fletcher, they installed Danny Briere, they brought in Keith Jones. I said, you know what? They're probably going to ride it out with Torts, but they shouldn't, because you should give your GM the ability to hire his own coach. They didn't. So they kind of, in a way, handcuffed the GM and the president of hockey ops to this coach. Now, John Tortorella is a very good coach, and over the course of his career has been a very good coach. I'm not taking that away from him. John Tortorella won a title 2 decades ago. He's Doc Rivers. He's been getting jobs based on a job that he did with a loaded Tampa team 2 decades ago. When I was in 8th grade, Tampa Bay won a Stanley Cup. He has taken some teams that didn't necessarily have high expectations and led them to some big upsets. He led Columbus on an 8 seed versus 1 seed upset in the first round. He took a bad Flyers team a season ago and got them pretty close to making the playoffs. Now, was that ultimately a good thing for the Flyers? No, it wasn't. It didn't put them in position to get some lottery luck and end up with like a top 5 pick. I certainly would like to believe that if you give a GM 3 to 5 years to install their plan, their vision, and actually rebuild, I would much rather see in year 1 of that rebuild, your team end up with a top 5 pick. You know that you kind of lucked into having Matvei Michkov fall because of geopolitical situation and because nobody thought he was going to come back over early. You could have gone into this past draft with a top 5 pick. Maybe you could have gotten an Ivan Demidov, who I've been very high on. Maybe you could have gotten somebody else that you liked better up at the top of the draft. Instead, you went and you took Jetlachenko, who looks like a good player, will probably get sent down here after the 9 games. Not blowing anybody's doors off. Certainly impressed enough to make the team. The coaches really fought for him. He got to play. Do I think Jetlachenko as a pro is going to be better than an Ivan Demidov? I don't. Do I think that they would have been better off having that top 5 pick? I do. Do I think that ultimately if the Flyers somehow turn this thing around and go back into hockey purgatory and they pick like 12th again this year, that that's good for a rebuild? I don't. No, I don't think that's how this works. I don't expect the Flyers to go out and actively lose. I expect the front office to give the coach, whoever that is, a subpar roster that's going to try to work really hard, and they're going to still lose games. You can't tell pro athletes go out and lose. That's how this works. That's how a rebuild is supposed to work. You can't tell players go out and lose. You can't tell coaches go out and lose. But you can take away enough tools that they have absolutely no shot of winning. That's part of a tank. And ultimately, if the Flyers end up with a top 5 pick, this in the next year's draft, that's great. That to me is kind of making up for what last year was supposed to be. But anyway, I bring it back to the coach because this coach lost this locker room last year. He lost them. He lost a lot of respect within that locker room. He lost respect from some people in the organization. He lost the respect of some people around the league, or at the very least, got a lot of eyebrows raising at the end of last season. Because if we take this back to the genesis of where this really went sideways for this head coach, and what I think will ultimately be his demise in Philadelphia, it was at the end of last year, after saying all season that he wasn't going to name a captain. Out of the blue, he names Sean Couturier captain. Now, I will tell you that there are conflicting reports. There are conflicting stories, depending on who you talk to, about who was the catalyst for naming Sean Couturier captain. I could tell you that in the moment, the belief was that the front office had been telling Torts all season, we want Coots to be the captain. He's earned the captaincy on this team. He's now proven through the first half of the season that he's back to being a good player. He's a great leader. He's well respected in this locker room. He's well respected around the league. He's a great guy on and off the ice. He embodies what it's supposed to be a captain. He's a guy that virtually every Flyers fan, these fickle Flyers fans, when Claude Giroux was dealt, the guy that most people thought should be the next captain was Sean Couturier. Those people act like that didn't happen. They act like they didn't say it now because his play has dropped off. They've now turned their backs on the guy. But that was what was being said in the moment. Somewhere along the line, a few weeks after Couturier gets named captain, there's this like counter narrative out there that became, oh, well, you know, Torts, this is all Torts. Torts wanted to name Sean Couturier captain. So then I present to you just some facts. Couturier gets named captain. Shortly thereafter gets benched. This is not normal. This is not normal for Sean Couturier. Now, again, his play fell off significantly in the second half. Why? He got overplayed in the first half, and he picked up multiple injuries. When we had Danny Briere and Keith Jones and Dan Hilferty on Snow the Goalie earlier this season, Briere said that Couturier was just racking up injury after injury after injury. He's like, in a way, it was almost funny, like, no matter what, he was picking up all these injuries, but none of them were to his back, which was good because you didn't want to have any more back injuries. The guy went through 2 back surgeries. He kept picking up injury after injury. Then in the offseason had a core muscle surgery, which take time to come back from. At the end of last year, the benching was supposed to be this moment. Many viewed it as, this is the moment that this coach is trying to galvanize an entire locker room against him, against Tortorella. That he said, you know what? I need to pull out one of those old school coaching tactics to get this team across the finish line and into the playoffs. And so he made the calculated decision, I'm going to send a message by benching the captain. These guys can hate me, and they're going to play well together, and we're going to ride momentum into the playoffs. And the exact opposite happened. The exact opposite happened. And John Tortorella lost a lot of respect in that locker room. So much so that when the season ended, multiple people have had the discussion around the fact that there were guys that thought he was going to get let go in the offseason because of how low the locker room viewed him at the end of the season. And it didn't happen. He came back. At one point last season, he kind of had a mea culpa. He sort of embarrassed Felix Sandstrom in a post-game presser. The next day came out and kind of, in a way, said that he was sorry for how he handled that. That wasn't because he just had a come to Jesus moment. It's because somebody within the organization said, you can't do that. You already have enough heat with the Couturier thing. You can't do that to Sandstrom. Sandstrom's just a guy. He's not part of the long-term vision here, but he's also not like an old wily vet. That was too much. That was a bridge too far. Okay. So they go through the offseason. Sean Couturier comes on Snow the Goal and he says, blank slate, clean slate. And when I asked him about whether or not it pissed him off last year that he got benched and that it seemed like the coach kind of had something going against him, you could see physically, if you watched on the video, and if you haven't, go watch the interview, you could tell that he was still upset about it. Guy's got pride. Any pro athlete has pride. If you don't, you shouldn't be playing sports. You could tell that he was hurt. I went on to the Morning Cup of Coffee or Morning Cup of Hockey show over on Daily Face-Off on Monday morning. Colby Cohen and his co-host Johnny, we were talking about this. And one of the things that those guys even said, they're not in the Flyers circle now, right? Like they're not actively embedded within the organization. They were shocked with what happened last year. And they were just as shocked in the home opener on Saturday night when John Tortorella decided to put Sean Couturier at fourth line left wing. Now, again, there were people who said Sean Couturier looked bad out west. He at most or at best looks like a fourth liner. He should be starting on the fourth line. And I very clearly said, I think that in a guy's 800th career game, a guy who's been a consummate professional, a guy who I have never, in the years I have been down around that team, heard anyone, player, coach, front office executive, usher, trainer, equipment people, camera people, microphone people, have never heard people say a negative word about the guy. In his 800th game, the coach plays him on the fourth line at left wing. Not fourth line center, not third line center, fourth line left wing. That was a message being sent. And the problem was we had a lot of people, and it continues to happen. There were a lot of people, especially on Twitter, but definitely all over social media, who tried to make an excuse for John Tortorella. Because for some fucking reason, there is a sect of Philadelphia Flyers fans who actively fillet this man on social media in a way I cannot ever recall a coach in this city getting given as many chances with a fan base as this Flyers fan base continues to give the guy. Now I'll go down from memory, okay? I don't remember anybody giving this kind of grace to Elaine Vigneault. They made martini jokes, but that was it. They didn't give this grace to Craig Berube or to Dave Hackstall or to Ken Hitchcock or to John Stevens. Let's look at the Sixers. They didn't give this kind of free reign to Doc Rivers. They don't give it to Nick Nurse. They didn't give it to Eddie Jordan or to Chris Ford or to Mo Cheeks or to Tony DeLeo. Let's go to the Phillies. They didn't give it to Ryan Sandberg or to Joe Girardi or to Rob Thompson or Charlie Manuel. We'd make some jokes, but no, they wouldn't give it to Charlie Manuel. They maybe gave him a couple of chances if he made a weird lineup decision, but eventually people started calling Charlie dumb. We were all here. We all lived through this. They didn't give these opportunities to Larry Boa. He didn't get carte blanche. Go to the Eagles. Nick Sirianni certainly doesn't get it. Doug Peterson didn't get it. Andy Reid didn't get it, nor did Chip Kelly. And if we even go to the Union, Jim Curtin doesn't get it. Novak didn't get it. So let's be real here. There is a certain connection that some people in this fan base have to this guy because he's an asshole. And because as a Philadelphia fan, we're intrinsically supposed to love assholes because we feel like the brashness is the way that this man identifies with this city. He's one of us. That's the way that some people have glommed onto this guy. And if you're like that, by all means, you can do that. And I'm not judging your fandom, but I am judging the hypocrisy. Because if Claude Giroux were the captain, and if Claude Giroux's play had dropped off the way that Sean Couturier's has, and Claude Giroux were about to play in his 800th game, and the coach decided to demote him from 1C to fourth line left wing, a lot of the people who are actively on Twitter, he's playing like shit. John Tortorella, he knows what he's doing. You got to earn your shot. Those people would be actively lighting things on fire. They would be lighting Flyers Twitter on fire, making excuses for why Claude Giroux didn't deserve to be demoted and what an asshole John Tortorella was. But for some reason, this fan base just doesn't like Couturier anymore. They have turned their backs on the guy, and I can't figure it out. The only thing I could think is they like Tortorella more. They identify with Tortorella more. And this fickle fan base has just continued to get more and more fickle. But I can't figure out for the life of me what this head coach has done to continue to deserve the blind fanaticism that he gets from certain groups of Flyers fans. I still don't get it. They haven't won shit. They weren't supposed to. Technically, in his first season as coach, Chuck Fletcher said they were a playoff team. I don't remember a nice lengthy playoff run in year one. Last year was supposed to be a rebuild. He burned out the captain, or the guy eventually that he named captain, coming off 2 back surgeries, burned him out in the first half of the season. Then some things went sideways. Your goalie had to turn himself into the London, Ontario police. You eventually traded one of your best defensemen. Another got injured. The backup who came over from Russia out of nowhere didn't exactly play particularly well. But I just don't get it. I don't get the love for this guy. And I'm trying to be fair. I'm critical of coaches. We all know at this point, I'm critical of Nick Sirianni. I've been critical of Doc. I've certainly had moments of being critical of Nick Nurse's in-game decision-making. I've been critical of Rob Thompson. I was of Joe Girardi. That just comes with the territory. But I can't ever remember a time as a Philadelphia sports fan where I have seen a guy who is so well thought of get treated in this way by a coach. And here's the probably nail in the coffin for the people who on Saturday were trying to make excuses for why Torts was right.
Sean Couturier, he's not a first line center, Russ. He's not even a second or third line center, Russ. He's a left wing. Torts is right.
What the fuck happened on Tuesday night? Sean Couturier was the 1C. So what changed? What exactly changed between Saturday, his 800th career game, and the home opener? He's only good enough to be the 4th line left wing. And then, by the way, went on to play the most minutes he's played in any game this season. And then last night, he's back to being the 1C. What changed? Oh, I know. The petty fucking coach who has decided to make these kind of things happen before, where he benches Bobby Brink in front of his in front of his friends and family on the road, in front of his hometown crowd, did the same thing to Travis Sanheim, has done this shit in other cities. The petty coach decided to be petty and send a message. And what happened? The Flyers got shut out on Saturday. It didn't resonate. It didn't work. They looked like absolute dog shit on Tuesday night. It didn't resonate. It didn't work. I'll tell you right now, this dude has lost that locker room. He has lost the respect of players that he desperately needs to have in his corner. I don't need to go down and talk to those guys in the locker room to know it. Watch their play on the ice. They have lost 5 straight games. Both games at home, they have not even looked remotely competitive. They have had little to no fire. They have looked listless. The same kind of things that have led people to call for Nick Sirianni's job all season are the same things that this Flyers team is doing. Now, admittedly, the talent level isn't the same. The Eagles have Super Bowl aspirations. The Flyers do not have Stanley Cup aspirations. But listless performances are listless performances. You can have a bad team that goes out and tries to bust their ass to win games, or you can have a team that goes out and looks like they are no longer playing for each other. The coach's message is falling on deaf ears. And that's what this is. And I tweeted last night. Last night I said, in that arena, it felt like the end of the Hextall days.
Oh, Russ, that's not true. The Flyers have a lot more high-level upside young players now than they did in the end of the Hextall era.
That's not what I'm saying. The feeling in the building, the team flailing on the ice, the lack of communication, the fact that that crowd was dead. That felt like the end of the Hextall era. And here's the other thing. There's one more thing for you. Last night, I saw a combination of executives and people who are legacy Flyers people. I saw them in the building, and I saw them in the box together. A lot of those people show up at different times throughout the season. They are all rarely around at the same time. And the last time that I can remember seeing that combination of people following something as negative as what we saw Saturday night with the message being sent to the captain again, and in the midst of a 4-game losing streak, the last time that I could remember seeing that combination of people, a few weeks later, Ron Hextall got fired. They're not going to fire Briere. They're not going to fire Jones. If this thing doesn't get the nose pulled up, if this coach can't get the Flyers to play better in Washington tonight, if this losing streak goes into the weekend, if it continues on Saturday, if it continues into Sunday, if they get through Sunday and they've lost 8 straight games, somebody needs to explain to me how the coach keeps his job. And again, I get it. The talent's not there. But if they look the way that they've looked in the last few games, where they don't look prepared and they don't look like anything is resonating, something has to change. And if you're one of the people who says, well, it's the players, it's always the players. A lot of the guys who were on this team were not on the team when Alain Vigneault was the coach, and we're not on the team when Dave Haxtell was the coach. At some point, you have to make a change. This organization fired Craig Berube with a pretty quick leash. They certainly fired Lavi with a quick leash. I don't know where Tortorella ends up. If they end up letting him go, or a decision is made that he can't be the head coach anymore, do they send him into the front office? I have no clue. I can't envision a scenario where they say, yo, dude, we're taking you off the bench. Come up and be an advisor and let Brad Shaw take over. Like, I don't see that. But then again, weirder shits happen. I think that the one place that this organization made a critical error, just in fairness, made a critical error, is that when they were doing the new era of Orange, they seemed to give equal voice to the head coach as they were to the new front office. And it has felt like since day one, the coach who eats up GMs may or may not have looked at this new GM who didn't have a lot of experience in that position in this league and maybe thought to himself, I'm going to be able to have a little bit more influence than I normally would. I think the Flyers have made their bed. They ultimately have to decide how they're going to get out of it. And by the way, the best case scenario is that the wheels do fall off. It is. So maybe keeping Torts in place and having everybody hate him, maybe that is the path forward. But here you are in year one of Matvei Mishkov. And if you're Matvei Mishkov, messages are being sent and the language barrier doesn't matter. You now watched your captain get demoted. What does that, like, what goes through your head at 19 years old? You're in a new country, new league. The head coach demotes the captain.
It shows that it's a meritocracy, Russ. It shows that you really earn your play. And if you haven't earned your play, then you don't get to play.
4th line left wing in his 800th game to 1st line center on Tuesday night. I rest my case for now. Do I think a firing is imminent? No. Do I think now the likelihood of John Tortorella finishing the season as head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers has gone down? I do. Does he make it to Thanksgiving? If this team continues to look like how they look and the mind games continue, no. No. They'll be stuffed like a Thanksgiving Day turkey. I was trying to remember that line from Up a Christmas Carol with Michael Caine.